Pull up a chair. This one's worth sitting with.
There is a boy asleep under a sycamore tree. The tree has grown up through the roof of an old church, a church nobody prays in anymore. The walls are still standing. The ceiling is long gone. And where the altar used to be, this tree pushed its way up toward the open sky. The boy is a shepherd. His sheep are scattered around him in the dark. And for the second time in his life, he is having the same dream. A child takes him by the hands, leads him to the pyramids of Egypt, and tells him that if he comes here, he will find a hidden treasure. Then he wakes. Same tree, same sky, same sheep. And a question he can't shake. You know this feeling, not the pyramids, but you've had your own version of this dream. Something you wanted so badly when you were young that you could feel it in your chest. And then, slowly, quietly, without ever really deciding to, you let it go. So let me ask you the thing this whole story is really asking. Where does motivation actually come from? Not the kind you force out of yourself on a Monday morning. The kind that wakes you up at night. Because this is not a story about a shepherd. This is not a story about buried gold. This is not a story about Egypt. This is a story about the quiet pull you have spent years learning to ignore. And here is the strange part. Hold on to this one. This boy is about to cross an entire desert to find something that was waiting for him the whole time. Something far closer than the pyramids. And yet, he could never have found it without leaving. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to know exactly which kind of motivation you've been running on. The boy sells his sheep. All of them. That's the first thing you have to understand about him. He didn't wait until it felt safe. An old man had walked up to him in a town square. An old man who called himself Melchizedek, a king from a place called Salem, and told him something the boy had never heard anyone say out loud. He said that every person, when they are young, knows exactly what they were put here to do. He called it your personal legend, the thing you have always quietly wanted to become. And then he said the part that should make you sit up straight. He said there is a force in this world that works to convince you your personal legend is impossible. Not your enemies, not bad luck. Something softer than that. He called it the world's greatest lie. The lie that, at a certain age, you lose control of your own life and hand it over to fate. Coelho once put it more plainly than the book does. He said you accept that lie the moment you start obeying rules that were never yours. The moment you start saying, I have to. So listen to your own week. Count how many times you say, I have to. Then count how many times you say, I want to. That ratio, right there, is the whole story. The boy crosses the sea to Africa. He's robbed within a day. And he ends up broke in a strange city, working for a man who sells crystal. This man, the crystal merchant, becomes the most important warning in the entire book. Because the merchant has a dream too. His whole life, he has wanted to make the pilgrimage to Mecca. He talks about it constantly. He knows the prayers, he knows the road, he even has the money. And he is never, ever going to go. You want to know why? Because the dream is the only thing keeping him standing. As long as Mecca is still out there, unreached, he has something to live for. But if he actually went, if he stood there, and it was finally done, what would be left to want? So he keeps the dream on a shelf, safe, untouched, like one more piece of his own crystal, beautiful, and never once used. That is the trap. Here is where one small word matters. Our word motivation comes from the Latin movere, to move. That is the whole meaning hiding inside it. Motivation was never supposed to be a mood you wait around for. It is the thing that moves you. And the quiet tragedy of the crystal merchant is exactly this: a man with a dream that never moved his feet a single step. You probably know someone like him, and if you're honest, there are seasons you've been afraid you were becoming him. But here's what most people miss about this part of the story. The boy works for that merchant for almost a year. He gets good at it. He saves real money, enough to go home, buy twice the sheep he started with, and settle into a comfortable, ordinary life. Everyone would have understood. Nobody would have blamed him. And that is the exact moment the real test arrives. Not when things are hard, when things are comfortable. Because forced motivation always points you toward comfort, toward the safe return, toward the sensible, smaller version of your life. But the other kind, the kind that pulls, it points the other way, toward the desert, toward the thing you can't quite explain to anyone, including yourself. The boy looks down the safe road home, and then he turns toward the desert. Let's stop here for a second, because we've already found the pattern. There are two kinds of motivation. One you have to force, and it always quietly points you home, to the safe and smaller life. The other one pulls, and it points you toward the desert, toward the thing you can't fully explain. If that distinction just landed somewhere in your chest, do me a small favor and subscribe. I make these for the people who feel that pull and don't know what to do with it. And tell me in the comments, what's the desert you've been avoiding? Now, back to the boy. The boy joins a caravan crossing the Sahara, and out there in the sand, he meets an Englishman. You'll recognize the Englishman. The Englishman is you on your most serious days. He has spent a small fortune on books. He has read everything ever written about alchemy, the old art of turning ordinary metal into gold. He can recite all of it. He's crossing the desert to find a real alchemist, a man said to be 200 years old, who can finally teach him the secret. And here is the thing that quietly undoes him. The Englishman is trying to learn the desert out of his books. He keeps his eyes down in the pages, while the actual desert, the thing he traveled all this way for, moves and breathes and speaks all around him. You can feel the lesson, can't you? You can read every book ever written on courage and still never do the brave thing. You can study motivation for years, the research, the systems, the perfect morning routine, and never once let yourself be moved. Knowledge is not movement. The Englishman has all the knowledge. The boy, who can barely read, is the one actually crossing the desert. But it gets stranger. At an oasis in the middle of nowhere, the boy meets a woman named Fatima, and he falls in love. The real kind. The kind that rearranges your plans. And here is exactly where you'd expect it to end. He has found something precious. He could stay. He could stop. Love is a perfectly good reason to set a dream down. Most people would even call it the mature choice. But Fatima does something almost no one in real life has the courage to do. She tells him to go. She tells him to follow his personal legend all the way to the end, and that she will still be here when he returns, because she is a woman of the desert, and the desert had taught her one word the boy needed to hear. Maktub. It's Arabic. It means, "It is written." Now be careful with that word, because it's easy to hear it wrong. Maktub does not mean sit back, do nothing. It will all work out on its own. It means almost the opposite. It means there is something already written into you, and your only real job is to move toward it. Fatima loved him enough to refuse to become his excuse. And this is where the old alchemist finally steps in. The boy is expecting a master full of secrets and spells. Instead, the alchemist keeps telling him to do one strange, simple thing. Stop pushing. Start listening to his own heart. The boy argues. He says his heart is a traitor. His heart is afraid. His heart keeps listing everything that could go wrong. And the alchemist tells him, of course it does. That is exactly why you listen to it. A heart that's afraid of suffering is a heart that is still alive, still wanting something. The fear was never the enemy of your motivation. The fear is the proof that something still matters to you. Sit with that one for a moment. The thing you are most afraid to want is usually the very thing you were built to chase. So the boy stops forcing. He stops dragging himself forward on willpower alone, and he starts moving the other way, pulled now, not pushed, toward a treasure he still has not seen, across a desert that is about to test him with everything it has left. Before the boy reaches the pyramids, I want to step out of the story for a moment and show you something from a laboratory. Because what the desert is about to teach him, science has already tested. In the early 1970s, researchers ran a now famous experiment with young children who loved to draw. They drew for one reason, because drawing was its own reward. Then the children were split into groups. One group was promised a little prize, a certificate for drawing. The other group was promised nothing. They just drew. Here is the part that should stop you. After the prizes stopped, the children who had been rewarded drew less. They'd lost interest in the very thing they used to love for free. The reward hadn't fed their motivation. The reward had quietly replaced it. That is the crystal merchant in a lab coat. That is what happens when the gold becomes the reason. The moment you do the thing for the prize becomes the only fuel you have left. And prizes always, always run out. So now watch what happens to the boy. He reaches the pyramids. He kneels in the sand and starts to dig. And he is attacked, beaten by a band of men who take the little he has. As he lies there with nothing, one of them sneers down at him and says something careless. He says he himself once had a recurring dream years ago. A dream telling him to travel to a ruined church in the hills of Spain, where a shepherd sleeps with his flock, and to dig beneath the sycamore tree growing up through the roof, where a treasure lies buried. But he laughs. Only a fool would cross a desert for a dream. And the boy starts to laugh too, because that ruined church is where he started. That sycamore tree is the tree from the very first scene. The treasure had been buried back home the entire time, under the exact spot where he first closed his eyes and dreamed. There it is. The thing I asked you to hold on to. He crossed an entire desert to find what was waiting for him at home. And here is the part nobody tells you. He could never have found it without leaving. The boy who digs up that treasure is not the boy who left. The desert is what made him into someone who could finally hold it. So let me say the thing this whole story has been circling. Real motivation is not louder, it is not faster, it is not borrowed from somebody else's life. It is the quiet thing that was already moving in you before anyone ever told you to move. And if part of you wants to call this a fairy tale, then remember who wrote it. A man whose own parents committed him to a mental institution and approved electroshock therapy because at 17 he dared to say he wanted to be a writer. A man who did not follow his own personal legend until he was much older. He wrote this book in about 2 weeks. It sold roughly 900 copies its first year. And then it became one of the most read books in the history of the world. His treasure was home too. It was the calling he had carried inside him the whole time. He simply had to cross his own desert before he believed he was allowed to dig it up. So before you go, let me leave you with 3 things to carry out of this. First, the motivation you have to force is borrowed motivation. It runs on prizes, on pressure, on other people's approval, and like every reward in that experiment, it eventually runs dry. If you have to whip yourself toward a thing every single morning, it was probably never really yours. Second, your personal legend is not the loud dream. It's the quiet one. It is the thing you keep circling back to, even years after you talked yourself out of it. The desert you've been avoiding. The thing you're a little afraid to even want out loud. That returning, that is the pull. So pay attention to whatever keeps coming back. And third, this is the one I most want you to keep. Santiago's treasure was never really the gold. The gold was buried at home the whole time. He could have just stayed and dug. The point was the boy who walked back to that tree. Braver, fuller, finally awake. And your treasure works the very same way. In the end, you will not be moved by what you get when you arrive. You'll be moved by who you became on the way there. So here is my question for you, and I read every answer. What is the one dream you keep talking yourself out of? The boy already knows where his treasure is buried. The only question left is whether you'll go and dig up yours.
Be gentle with yourself this week, and when you're ready, there'll be another one waiting. Sit with this one till then.